Hello. So in this video we're going to talk about Euripides' play Iphigenia Among the Taurians. Sometimes the title is rendered Iphigenia in Taurus, but as I understand it, there was never actually a city or an area called Taurus. That seems to be a mistake that Goethe made in a translation, assuming that the Taurians were from a city-state called Taurus, or a region called Taurus. So this chronologically occurs really toward the end of the Atreidae cycle. So you have the sacrifice of Iphigenia at Aulis, depicted in Euripides' play Iphigenia in Aulis. Then you have the events of the Orestes and Electra cycle. So Aeschylus' Orestes, Sophocles' Electra, Euripides' Electra and Orestes. And then later on, after the end of the events depicted in the Orestes, you have this play, Iphigenia Among the Taurians. Now, the premise essentially is that rather than being sacrificed in Aulis, Iphigenia was replaced by Artemis with a deer that was sacrificed, and Iphigenia was taken away and deposited among the Taurians at a shrine to Artemis, where she becomes the temple priestess. And basically, her job is to purify Greeks that have been captured. So any Greek who comes into the territory of the Taurians is sacrificed to Artemis, and Iphigenia's job is to get those sacrifices ready. There does seem to be some historical basis for this, based on what Herodotus says in his histories, that the Taurians, who lived in what's now Crimea, did practice some form of human sacrifice, and they practiced human sacrifice to honor some sort of virgin deity who's not necessarily Artemis as such, but in the way that the Romans would later identify, say, Celtic gods with Roman gods' names. I think the Greeks sort of identified this Taurian virgin goddess as Artemis. So that's where we start the play. Iphigenia is in this temple where she basically she starts by recapping what's happened, and then she talks about a dream that she's had about basically the pillars of her father's house collapsing, and she interprets this dream to mean that Orestes has died. So she knows she has a brother, Orestes, but she's been among the Taurians for mythological time. It's not even possible to say. It's got to be at least 20 years, realistically, because we have 10 years of the Trojan War, then we have several years between when Clytemnestra and Aegisthus kill Agamemnon upon his return from the Trojan War. Several years later, at least 10, as much as 18 years later, Orestes kills Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. So that would put it anywhere between 20 and 30 years she's been here. That, by the way, is the bulk of an average lifetime for someone in the Iron Age, the late Bronze Age. And then there's several years in which Orestes is driven mad by the Furies before he has the trial in Aeschylus's The Eumenides. And then this occurs after that, because apparently he's still being tormented by the Furies, even though in the Aeschylus version they all agree to let him go. Apparently in this Euripides version they don't all agree to let him go, so some of the Furies continue pursuing him. And so what he has to do is... I'll give it to you in Orestes' own words, because he explains his mission here. But anyway, however long it's been, mythological time doesn't function by normal rules, so she can have been there 35, 40 years, and it doesn't matter. She's 3 years older, whatever it is. But she's had this dream, so she determines that this means that Orestes has died. So that's quite significant, because I'll tell you in just a minute. So Orestes is here on a mission. So what he says is, "O Phoebus, since my mother slew my father and I slew her, have you trapped me again in your net of oracles? I've been pursued by hordes of Furies all over the earth, far from my native land, and when at last I ran to you and begged that you would stop this crazy cycle of obsession and end the agony, the torture that hurtled me to and fro the length and breadth of Hellas, your answer was, 'Go to the land of Taurus, where my sister Artemis enjoys a shrine, and take from there her effigy, which fell, they say, from heaven. If you are man enough or lucky enough to steal it, bring the image when the danger is done home to the land of Attica.' You said no more, except that when I had accomplished this, I'd win respite at last from all my labors. So here I am, obedient to your will, here in this savage and mysterious land." So Orestes has come to steal an effigy of Artemis from the temple, where, unbeknownst to him, Iphigenia is still alive and is working as the temple priestess. Now, it becomes significant that Iphigenia thinks Orestes is dead because Orestes and Pylades, his companion, are captured by the Taurians, and they are brought to be sacrificed. So, one of the things... so, basically, Iphigenia and her sort of temple priestesses, her servants, are all Greeks, and so they are always very interested in news from Greece. They apparently don't even know that the Trojan War has ended, and that would have ended mythological time ago. And so she starts asking all these questions, and Orestes refuses to give his name. It's not necessarily super clear why he does this, apart from not wanting to be sort of shamed, not wanting his reputation to be destroyed because he's being sacrificed. But what ends up happening is that when she learns that he's from Argos, Iphigenia asks if he will make a trade with her, where she will get him safely out of the territory of the Taurians and back to his ship if he will carry a letter to her friends in Argos, because that's also where she's from, as coincidence would have it. So, Orestes, because this is actually his mission, he instead asks that the letter be entrusted to Pylades, who would then take it to Argos on his behalf, and Orestes would stay and be sacrificed. So, Eventually, the letter is actually brought out, and out of concern that the ship might sink and Pylades might escape, but the letter might be lost, Iphigenia determines to read it to him so that he will know the message anyway. So she starts by saying, "The message is to Orestes, son of Agamemnon." Aha, the pieces start to fall into place. And so this is actually the premise of the recognition scene. And as we know from Euripides' Electra, where he satirizes the recognition scene from Aeschylus's The Libation Bearers, Euripides is skeptical about recognition scenes. They're often, in Greek tragedy, sort of contrived. They often have a very sort of flimsy premise of like, oh, I gave you this necklace as a baby and I recognize it, so this must be my lost baby, or whatever it is. And Aeschylus has a similar sort of technique in The Libation Bearers, and then in Euripides' Electra, he basically rips this recognition scene apart. So here he has a recognition scene basically based on Iphigenia in the course of reading this letter saying, "Hey Orestes, I'm Iphigenia. I'm not dead. Come get me." And Pylades, of course, says, "Oh, what an easy oath you had me swear. It won't take a moment to make good. This letter is to you, Orestes. I hand it to you. It's from your sister standing here." So this is the premise of the recognition scene, basically. And then Iphigenia is convinced that this is actually Orestes when he sort of narrates the story of their family. So they go from there to, now we have to figure out a plan how to get out of the territory of the Taurians with this effigy of Artemis, and without all of us being brutally killed. So the plan they come up with is that Iphigenia is going to tell the king, King Taus, that basically that the sacrifice of Orestes and Pylades can't be done yet because of Orestes' matricide. So they need to be cleansed in the ocean, and because Orestes has touched the statue of the goddess, that also needs to be cleansed in the ocean. So basically she takes them down to the sea, and King Taus is basically like, yeah, that checks out. I've run the numbers and that makes sense to me. So he lets them go. And so they go down to the ocean where the Greek ship is, at which point they get on the Greek ship, and the set of guards and servants and things that Iphigenia had asked to come along with them start trying to stop them. At which point the Greeks basically beat them up and drive them back. And so King Taus is going to go and get his whole army and deploy his ships and things like this to stop them and bring them back. When, at the end of the play, in very convenient fashion, Athena appears. And Athena we have here a Deus Ex Machina ending. Literally, Athena would have appeared on what was called the Mechane, which was a giant sort of crane that held gods up and things like this. So this is literally God from the machine, or in this case, goddess from the machine, because the Machina was the Latin term for Mechane in the Greek. So Athena shows up and she's basically like, "Hey, King Taus, let my people go." She's Moses, I guess. I just decided that arbitrarily. No, but she's like, "Listen, man, Apollo has prophesied that Orestes needs to take this statue of Artemis back to Athens, so you have to let him do it. And she gives some other commands, but that's the key one. Basically, it's don't slaughter all these people. The gods have determined that they need to go. So we have that bit, and that's basically the end of it, is like, King Taus is like, yeah, Athena, you know what? I'm not going to challenge the gods on this one. So we have that ending, and it's I don't know. It's a little bit of a disappointing ending, I guess. And Deus Ex Machina endings are always a little bit disappointing, so, there's that. But it's a happy ending because nobody gets brutally slaughtered, so yay, not brutally slaughtering anyone. But there's also some other interesting things in Iphigenia Among the Taurians. One is that Iphigenia's attitude to her sacrifice is very different than it is in what's a much later Euripides play, Iphigenia in Aulis. She's not super pleased that she was sacrificed. And in fact, she blames the Greeks, she blames Agamemnon for this. And actually the Taurians do as well. And so we have this interesting bit here where a herdsman who comes in initially to bring the news that Orestes and Pylades have been captured, he says, "Give us a few lads like these to butcher, and Hylas will have made amends for your death. Yes, indeed, repay the blood they clamored for at Aulis." Which makes it sound like the Taurians' human sacrifice was instituted to take revenge for Iphigenia's sacrifice. But that doesn't really make any sense. So, we've got that bit. But then later she says, "If only Zeus had sent a wind blowing that Helen who has ruined me through the rocky straits of Symplegades, and Menelaus too, wouldn't I just have had my revenge on them? Paid them back for Aulis with an Aulis here. I'd punished them for the day the Argives hoisted me like a calf upon the altar, my own father the bloody celebrant. What a memory, I can never shake it off. Over and over I reached for my father's face, clung to his knees, pleading, 'Father, this wedding party, you cannot give me away like this. My mother and the women of Argos, as you get ready to slaughter me, are singing wedding songs. Flute notes fill the house while I'm being killed, yes, by you. So Achilles is death, not Peleus' son, whom you tricked me here to marry. In a war cart you've dragged me here, you traitor, to a wedding full of blood.'" Now, if you watched my video on Iphigenia in Aulis, one of the things that's striking about that play is that Iphigenia is the only really noble character in it. And a big part of her nobility revolves around willingly embracing her role as the sacrifice, choosing to give up her own life for the glory of Greece, so that the Greeks can win the Trojan War. So that's an interesting difference here, because in this version, she's very clearly saying, I did not want to die, I was protesting, I was unhappy, and I was telling anyone who would listen not to kill me. So we've got that very interesting difference between the two versions. The other thing that I think is really interesting, or one of the other passages I think is really interesting, is that Iphigenia has this thought. She's musing to herself. She says, "I'm not impressed with Artemis' subtleties. She won't let anyone come near her altar who has touched blood, or a woman in childbirth, or a corpse, because they are tainted, yet takes delight in human sacrifice. No, I cannot bring myself to think that Leto, Zeus's wife, could generate such absurdity. Nor do I believe what is said of Tantalus, that he gave a banquet to the gods, regaling them with children's flesh. No, I believe that the people of this land, being murderers themselves, have foisted their murderous instincts on the goddess. I refuse to think that any god is evil. So this is an interesting thing because, in fact, we do know from the entire body of Greek mythology that the gods regularly send people to horrible fates. Including, Iphigenia, who is sacrificed and sent to among the Taurians to basically kill other Greeks for years. Well, Orestes was condemned to murder his mother and be tortured by the Furies for years. So we know that the Greeks are capricious and cruel in Greek mythology. Or we know that the gods are capricious and cruel. I feel like I said it. Anyway, never mind. We know that the gods are capricious and cruel in Greek mythology. So, and we also know that Euripides is not the most reverent of playwrights. He does frequently call out the gods for being cruel, for being arbitrary, for being fickle, etc., etc. So it's an interesting passage to put into the mouth of a priestess.